What's up, everybody? Welcome into the DFS Army Bulk Call Waiver Wire podcast for week 2. This is going to be a weekly podcast where we give out the best waiver wire pickups and we give you FAAB bid suggestions. This podcast is brought to you by our friends over at No House Advantage, which is a props for cash site. We strongly advise, and we'll talk about them in a few minutes, that you go over to No House Advantage, download their app, put in the code ARMY, and they'll match your deposit of $20. So today, again, for those of you joining live, thank you. It's good to see you all pop in the chat. And for those of you listening on the audio cast, this is going to be a short podcast. We're going to try to make these 15 minutes or less. This is something that while you're going to take a walk, while you're in your short commute going to work, that you can listen, get your waiver wire bid suggestions down, and then you can go in and dominate your league. Now, this is an interesting week going into week 2. You want to be aggressive. Let's just talk about overall strategy first. My strategy is don't save your money. If there's someone that you need or you like, let's get aggressive with our FAAB dollars. And if those of you are still playing in a league where you have priority, you have the number one priority, you want to go in there and spend that priority. This is one of those weeks where there's actually some short-term fixes and there's long-term solutions on the waiver wire. Usually that doesn't happen. As we get later into the season, there's usually just those running backs that will, get you through 2 or 3 weeks. And that's great. And we want to get those guys. But let's start with the running back position for the waiver wire, because that's going to be the most important. That's the one that we're most interested in. Those are your team probably doesn't have enough running backs, or you probably don't even like them, or you drafted James Conner, right? And already he's hurt. You took him in the second round. You took him in the third round. He's already hurt. So what we're going to do is go position by position. I'll give you my rankings of these players, which ones are most important to get. And then what we're going to do is we're going to give a FAAB bid suggestions that are based on $100. So I'll just give them in percentage form. All right. So let's start with the running backs. Now, without really ranking them, let's go down with that list of 10 running backs that I think are the most 10 important running backs. And what we're going to do is use usually 30% or less owned. So if a running back is more than 30% owned in Yahoo leagues, that's more of the threshold that I use. We usually don't talk about them, but we're going to mention a few guys that are. All right. Not in this order, but right off the bat, the 10 most important running backs that you should be considering on the waiver wire this week are Malcolm Brown, Niamh Heinz, Benny Snell, Adrian Peterson, who is over 30%, but we're going to include him, Joshua Kelly, Peyton Barber, Myles Gaskin, Frank Gore, Josh Adams, the other running back on the Jets, now that Le'Veon Bell was sent to IR for 3 weeks, and Jerick McKinnon, to my surprise, was only about 15% owned. So let's take those guys one at a time. I'm getting questions all day in the DFS Army Slack chat. Should I get Benny Snell? Should I get Malcolm Brown? Should I get Niamh Heinz? And they all have very different reasons why you should go get them. If you're the James Conner owner, it goes without saying. You're going to need to go get Benny Snell. And we'll talk about how much you should actually spend on Benny Snell. Benny Snell, and because remember, James Conner might be fine. Pittsburgh has showed a propensity to stay with one running back, and whatever you spend on him could be just total waste. So you have to keep that in mind, that Benny Snell is likely a short-term fix. All right, so now Malcolm Brown. Malcolm Brown has been just a guy. He's 27 years old. And if the Rams liked him, why would they even draft Cam Akers? Why would they draft Darrell Henderson the year before? But if you watch that football game, Malcolm Brown looked like, take all his history out, he looked like a player that can move. And in our fantasy leagues, we often say, when I do the podcast with the Geek, we talk about a committee of 2 is fine. It's a committee of 3 that's a real problem. And what we saw from the Rams, it was mostly a committee of 2. Cam Akers did not look ready to be an NFL running back. He will be, but that was our biggest fear of him coming out, is that he was a little bit green and that it might take time to learn the Sean McVay system. We also learned that Cam Akers, going back to previous years, that the Rams aren't just going to throw a rookie right into the mix. Darrell Henderson the year before, he had to wait his turn. So Malcolm Brown looks like a good play. Again, just his resume of not doing much in the NFL before is concerning. I wouldn't break the bank with him, and I would expect him not to be a season-long answer. But if you're desperate at running back, an $8, $12 bid. Now, that's another important thing. You know your league. You know your league. I don't know your league. So if your league is a league that goes aggressive on running backs, then you're going to need to adjust for that inflation. If you're in a league with a bunch of nutless spenders and people that like to hoard their money, then you'll be able to get them. I wouldn't recommend spending more than 8 to 12% of your budget on Malcolm Brown. He's definitely the guy right now, but I wouldn't expect him to be in 2 or 3 weeks from now. The next player I want to talk about. Oh, you see, the geek just commented on my new polo shirt here, which is the DFS Army polo shirt right here. I'm backwards in there. And this is the fresh gear that you can get at DFS Army. All right. Also, just again, one more reminder before we move on. Our friends over at No House Advantage, props for cash. If you like prop games like I do, definitely go check them out. Deposit with the code ARMY, get a $20 match. All right. Here, let me show off my shirt for everyone. There you go. I see people asking for it in the chat. There it is. See? Logo, and then you have the logo right here. All right. Niamh Heinz. Let's move quick. We don't want this to be a long podcast. Niamh Heinz is the player I think that you really need to go in and get. Now, Niamh Heinz, he's a satellite back. He's a pass catching back, and we all know what happened with Indianapolis over the last few days. Marlon Mack is out for the season. Jonathan Taylor is promoted to the primary ball carrying duties. Now, we cannot ignore Philip Rivers' history with satellite backs, with those PPR backs. He made Danny Woodhead a fantasy superstar. He made Darren Sproles before that a fantasy superstar. We know Austin Eckler. We know the story with him last year, but we also know that Austin Eckler would have been good anyway. So Niamh Heinz doesn't have the upside that he had in week one. That's not going to happen every week. It's not even, especially now that Jonathan Taylor is getting the primary ball, the primary touches. But what we do know is that Niamh Heinz is going to be fantasy relevant for the entire year. He's someone that you can play in your RB2 slot. You can play in your flex slot. So that's the player I want you to go get. I want you to get very aggressive on him too. In your league, even if you don't need a running back, I want you to go get him. And I'll tell you why. And we'll talk about bid amounts in a minute. Because if you get Niamh Heinz and he pans out like we think he's going to pan out, you could sell off that running back that you drafted that has a little bit more name value. Imagine if you get Niamh Heinz. He puts up another good week for you. Gets you 15, 16 fantasy points. And let's say you own Todd Gurley too. He's your RB2. And he does a 20-pointer. We all know that Gurley, we don't want him as the season goes on. He's good for a beginning of the season. So what I want you to do is I want you to get Niamh Heinz. Go get him. Doesn't mean spend $100. Don't push it all in your bid, but get aggressive. 18, 25 bucks. Whatever you need to do to go get him. I've heard someone say, hey, I'm going to put in 60. I don't recommend that, but if you know your league and that's what you need to do, go get him. It's not often you're going to get a starter for the whole season on the waiver wire. So that's what I want you to do. I want you to go into your league and get Niamh Heinz, not because we think he's going to win your league, but we think that he's going to be in your starting lineup when things go sour for you. And we also think that if you have a fragile starter, if you have a Nick Chubb and you're not happy, you're real nervous. You took Nick Chubb in the second round. We think that one good Nick Chubb game, you might be able to sell him off and get an upgrade somewhere else. Maybe you don't like your tight end. So Niamh Heinz is someone that's going to hold down the fort for you. He would be my number one ranked waiver ad across the board. Now, I've looked across some of the other mainstream waiver ads. He is not even in the top 2 in some of them. He should be for the reasons I just outlined. Okay, let's talk about some of the other running backs quickly, and then we'll move on to other positions. Benny Snell. We talked about Benny Snell. This, I don't know the answer. If James Conner's out, Benny Snell will be a great short-term ad. He looked fantastic in the game last night. But if you go spend your money, you may have nothing. James Conner might be playing this week. So Benny Snell is going to be as important to you as he is to your roster, meaning if you have James Conner, he's important to your roster. If you just need another running back, you could put a keep him honest bid. You could put an $8 or $12 for even an $18. I don't mind. Even if it ends up being a zero, you're going to want Benny Snell on your roster because as we see already, James Conner is fragile. I wouldn't make him a priority ad, but he could end up being the most important waiver guy of the week. He's a tough guy because he's a tough guy to put a bid amount on because he doesn't even belong in the same category as the other ones because he's a short-term fix. All right, moving on. Josh Kelly. People were asking about Josh Kelly all day. We weren't on Josh Kelly this offseason. We liked him as a prospect and as a dynasty, as a high-yield handcuff, but when he got in the game, he showed exactly what he did at UCLA. He was a baller. He was the goal line back. My guess is that Austin Eckler, he got his 19 carries, and Josh Kelly got the goal line work, and it's probably going to stay that way. If you own Eckler and you're panicked, I understand. The catches weren't there. They will be there. He's not going to have 1 catch games or 0 catch games. He's going to have 5, 6, and 8 catch games. It's going to happen, so hang in there. Especially if we do get to see Justin Herbert at some point, he will absolutely get his catches. And the 19 carries, that's an upgrade from where he's been. So fear not. Back to Josh Kelly, 10% bid, 8% bid. I wouldn't make him a priority ad. I mean, meaning like I wouldn't go all in, but he's a player you're going to want on your roster. So all of these players so far, if you don't want to throw the hammer down, I told you, Niamh Heinz you got to get, but the other ones, I would temper your try to get them if you can, but you could stagger your bets. You could say, hey, if I don't get this guy, I'll prioritize this guy. They're all about the same value level, depending on what your roster looks like. And Adrian Peterson falls in that category too. I mean, he looked like Adrian Peterson, not the peak Adrian Peterson that won rushing titles and 2,000 yards in a season, but the Adrian Peterson that we've seen since age 29. That's a good 2-down back that's going to get goal line hits. And even at age 34, he looks exactly the same on the field. He looked really good to me. So that's another player. It's not very often, and he's going to be a season-long player too. That's what's important too. You may bid on him and not use him and have to drop him later on. That's fine. There'll be other guys that come up. But these are players that we want because they have a chance to perform all season long. Peyton Barber. Now, I've been getting questions about Peyton Barber all day. He was good. He was the goal line back, and he did really well. And he's probably going to get the next goal line carry for Washington as well. You know why? Because he's good at it. Antonio Gibson, he's a rookie. He got stuffed on the goal line, and they gave it to Peyton Barber, and he converted twice. But they're going to be low yard. They're going to be like Jerome Bettis type of stat lines. 5 carries, 6 yards, 2 touchdowns. And if he doesn't get those 2 touchdowns, he completely busts. Is he worth rostering? Absolutely. But if you're watching this podcast, which means you're a good, smart fantasy football player, you probably can't even fit all these guys in your roster. There's players right now in your league mates have on your roster that are they shouldn't even be on their roster. So there's going to be players like Peyton Barber that you can get. I would be shocked if Peyton Barber goes for anything more than $4 or $5. Maybe some guy in your league puts like an $8, $9 bid on there. He's certainly worth a keep him honest bid at $2, $3, $4. But again, if Peyton Barber doesn't score each week, he's not going to be worth starting. But he's got a role, and it's the goal line role, and that's a valuable role. So he's worth mentioning on this podcast. Jerick McKinnon shouldn't be on your waiver wire. He's going to have a role. He's it's very crowded in San Francisco, but Jerick McKinnon, hopefully you listened to our podcast all offseason and you rostered him. But for some reason, I don't think he's going to be expensive to get. If you need a running back and you miss out on the expensive ones we just talked about, I think Jerick McKinnon can be had for a $4 or $5 bid. And I want him on my roster because, again, he has the upside to be your RB2. I think that he can go as high. He can be an RB1 on some weeks. I'm starting Jerick McKinnon in a couple of leagues this year, and I'm happy to do it. If you went 0 running back, Jerick McKinnon was one of the answers. He was one of the answers. So put Jerick McKinnon, make a small bid on him. I bet you'll get him. And if you miss out on some of these other guys that have that got more attention this week on the waiver wire, he is a good player. Running back is fruitful. Now, here's the sneaky play of the week. Myles Gaston on Miami. He looked the best out of all of the running backs. Jordan Howard, I think he converted a goal line try. Matt Breida was really not even part of the game plan, and Myles Gaston had shiftiness to him. Now, last year as a rookie, Myles Gaston, we were on him. We were talking about him, but he didn't perform much. Now, this coach, he gave him most of the work there. So Myles Gaston, if you can, is again just another couple dollars. It's Miami, so we're not too excited, and he feels very fragile. Like at any moment, Jordan Howard and Matt Breida could take back the lead role, but they don't have much invested in either of these guys. So Myles Gaston's a sneaky few dollar ad. I know he's on many mainstream lists, but I don't think that many people in your league are going to want to add him or even know about him, and even people that are experienced in your league. So if you miss out on some of those other guys, he is definitely a nice ad. He might even be free after waivers run for you just to pick up. All right, let's move into the, let me see if I have anyone else on my list here to tell you about. Now, we covered all the main guys. Now, if you have anyone else, we could talk about them. You can hit me up in the Slack chat or on Twitter at Alan Seslowsky. All right, we're doing good, guys. We're doing good. So it's Josh Adams. We didn't talk about Josh Adams. Now, with the news that Le'Veon Bell went on went on IR. Remember, IR this year in the NFL is a little different, everybody. IR means they're out for 3 weeks. Doesn't mean they're out for the whole season or 8 weeks. They're just out for 3 weeks. Now, Frank Gore at his age cannot be a feature back. So that means they're going to need another player, and that's Josh Adams, who did get some carries and looked good. He's a banger. He's a bruiser. I wouldn't be surprised if he's the goal line back. LaMichael Pirine, who they drafted, is not ready to play yet. He's still injured. And don't start with listen, even if they bring in Devontae Freeman, everyone always says they could bring in Devontae Freeman. No. And if they do, it's not, you want them to bring in Devontae Freeman. I don't know if he's still good. He hasn't been good in a couple of years. And I just don't think that helps the Jets anyway. You never know, though. All right, let's move on to the wide receivers. All right, there's some good wide receivers. So remember, that's why I said don't blow all your money on the running backs. If you need a receiver like I do this week, oh, man, I had so much wide receiver problems this week. I didn't realize in my 15 or 20 leagues that I drafted Odell Beckham as much as I did. I drafted way too much Odell Beckham. And I was happy about it until this week. But upon rewatching some of the highlights, he looks like he was open. It just looked like Baker Mayfield wasn't able to find him. Okay, I'm looking through the chat, by the way, and I see some people asking me about specific bid amounts. Just remember those bid numbers that I'm putting out there; those are percentages. So if your waiver bid budget is 135, 150, just use that percentage. Do the math on your own. That doesn't come with the DFS Army membership. Me doing math for you. Let's see what we got here. All right, so we're going to go wide receivers. So Paris Campbell, if you were listening to the DFS Army Bull Call podcast, he shouldn't be on your waiver wire because you own him. The Geek and I said all summer long, he's the best wide receiver and might be the best player on the Indianapolis Colts. He profiles exactly like a Phillip Rivers wide receiver like he likes. Remember how he treated Keenan Allen, peppered him with targets. And last year, Paris Campbell, you know how we graded him? Incomplete. He got hurt right away. He was dinged up all season. Paris Campbell was our wide receiver 1 in the class pre-draft. We know that it should have been A.J. Brown or DK Metcalf at this point. But there were so many good receivers, and I'm still convinced that Paris Campbell is going to be a perennial high-end wide receiver 2, low-end wide receiver 1 for his career. So for you dynasty players, like I could see him finishing as wide receiver 10 to wide receiver like 16 for the rest of his peak of his career. And we saw that on display. Now, he wasn't even fully unleashed, and it was a weird game with the Jaguars, but go prioritize him if you need him. I put a 14% bid on him in the DFS Army sheets. Any league that you're in with me, Paris Campbell's owned. He's on my roster. He's literally my most owned late round wide receiver. But if he's floating out there, he's going to be a priority to get him this week. Other wide receivers out there, there's some good ones. I'm looking through our list right here on the DFS Army. By the way, if you're a DFS Army member, just go to the season long tab and click on the waiver wire sheet. I update it every Tuesday. And if you're not a DFS Army member and you're bootlegging this podcast for free, that's okay. We don't mind that, but just come on over and check out a membership. You get VIP. Use code SEZ, S-E-Z. That's short for Alan Seslowsky, S-E-Z. And you'll get 20% off. And you can enjoy our Slack community and everything else. And all our great tools for DFS. Remember, all the great season-long information that we're giving you, this is just a little part of it. The main part of the site is DFS. And all the great coaches over there, they cover a whole array of topics. All right. Moving on. So let's look at our wide receivers. Paris Campbell, we said, is our priority. Hey, how many of you have been burned by Robbie Anderson before? Raise your hand. I see you. Me too. You know what it is with Robbie Anderson? When he was on the Jets, by the way, Robbie Anderson doing well. Is he the newest Gase released player that does well? He had some problems on the Jets under Adam Gase. Now he's released. I mean, that's a narrative that I love, by the way. If they talk about all these players that were under Adam Gase, Devontae Parker, Ryan Tannehill, Jay Ajayi, as soon as they got released or out of the Adam Gase clutches, they did well. Maybe Robbie Anderson is the newest one. Robbie Anderson on the Jets, we always knew what he was. He was a burner, straight line speed, has great hands. So the new coach, Matt Rule, on the Carolina Panthers, coached Robbie Anderson at Temple University. First thing he did was sign Robbie Anderson. So I was like, okay, this is good. This is good for Robbie Anderson's outlook. And then what happens? They sign Teddy Bridgewater, and the air comes out of the bubble, because we know that Teddy Bridgewater's game doesn't line up with what Robbie Anderson his game is, which is long speed. But if you watch that game, Robbie Anderson was running routes 15 yards from the line of scrimmage, 12 yards from the line of scrimmage. He was getting that Odell Beckham treatment where he gets the slant and go. And if you watch that game, Robbie Anderson caught that pass and he was off to the races. Robbie Anderson is going to be a volatile wide receiver 3 for the rest of the season. Think about him how we would think of Will Fuller in past years. A wide receiver 3 where we know getting 3 catches for 39 yards is always a possibility. But our wide receiver 3, we've said it all the time, in our podcast all summer long, how we like to play fantasy football is a high variance, high ceiling wide receiver 3, like Robbie Anderson, because he has league tilting upside, just like Will Fuller. And we saw that on display. I don't think people are going to be fighting you for Robbie Anderson. You'll probably be able to get him for $5, $6, $7. I mean, if you put 11, you're going to get him. You're going to get him. And you can't, if you drafted J.J. Arcega-Whiteside or Miles Boykin or one of these guys we loved as a late round pick and they just didn't pop and you don't want to wait for them, Robbie Anderson is the perfect ad. Now, if J.J. Arcega-Whiteside showed nothing. So it's going to be hard to hold a guy like that. So those are the type of guys that I'm purging off the end of my roster and adding a Robbie Anderson. Robbie Anderson could be one of those players you put in your lineup 3 times in a row and it just doesn't work out and you have to cut him. I think you can get him for a single-digit bid. Moving down our list. Nikhil Harry, MVS, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Quintus Cephas are some of the guys that I have under the wide receiver. Now, Nikhil Harry, they have a lot. The Patriots have a lot invested in him, so I certainly think that I'm not sure you want to add him because I don't know if it's going to work out. But if you have, he could be $1, $2 guy. He did get a bunch of targets. They're going to force feed him the ball, and here's the best part of why I think the case for Nikhil Harry is that he profiles similar to how Cam Newton, he had some success with Kelvin Benjamin a few years back, those big, towery wide receivers that have a big catch radius. So Harry still can work out. And again, you could just kind of put a couple bucks on him. MVS, he never had the trust of Aaron Rodgers. Again, he can get him for a couple dollars. If you're like me in some of your leagues, your wide receiver 3 is just not working out for you. MVS is definitely worth a dart throw. And the one player who we did pound the drum a little bit for this offseason was Corey Davis. Now, he looked good on Monday night. Let's see if he can keep it up. We said that he has a chance to be this year's Devontae Parker. Corey Davis, I think people are going to be dubious and skeptical and leave him. You might even be able to get him after waivers run, but he had 100 yards. He looked good. He looked like Corey Davis that we thought that the Titans drafted. So single-digit bid, you can go get him. Now, you can't get all of these guys. You're going to have to pick which ones you want. And truthfully, I don't know, but Corey Davis would be one that looks like he's part of the game plan. He's going to have a little bit of a higher floor. Now, another player that I think is an important player to consider is Russell Gage. Russell Gage, if you listen to the Bull Call DFS Army podcast all season long, the Geek was telling you, I was telling you that Russell Gage you need to add him in the 18th round of your best ball draft. Because the Atlanta Falcons, they throw the most out of anybody in the entire league. I mean, last year, I think they had 680 pass attempts. And just to give you context, like the next highest was like in the low 600s. And, the lowest is usually around like 500 pass attempts. Russell Gage, he's the wide receiver 3 on the Atlanta Falcons, but the tree is narrow. Meaning that they don't throw to like 5 receivers. They throw to Julio Jones, they throw to Calvin Ridley, and Hayden Hurst is in town, but the first game, it didn't look like he was up to speed. And Russell Gage, and this is not a player that's going to win you your league. This is a player that you can put in your wide receiver 3 spot if you want a little bit more of a higher floor with a high ceiling. He had over 100 yards. So Russell Gage is a player that you're going to want to, if you don't want that high variance Robbie Anderson type of player, this is a nice alternative. Someone with a little bit higher floor and a higher ceiling. A single-digit bid, it should get it done. And single digits, I don't mean $2, $3. Maybe you want to go $6 or $7 if you want. Pick the guy that you want and put a few bucks on them. I don't have the crystal ball. I can't tell you for sure. I can only tell you who the best ads are, and I can tell you what in my judgment, I like all these guys. Again, Gage, higher floor. Let's take a look down at the waiver wire list. So I mentioned Quintus Cephas. Now, he's a rookie. He got 10 targets. He led the Lions in targets. I don't know if that's going to continue as soon as Golladay comes back. So, after waivers runs, if you didn't get anything, he's a decent ad. Again, 10 targets for a rookie. He's a player we love in Dynasty. If you're in a Dynasty league and Cephas wasn't drafted, shame on your league, but you should go get him right away. And that's kind of it for the wide receivers. I mean, Scott Miller on Tampa looked like that. He looks like Julian Edelman and Wes Welker had a baby, and all of a sudden, that's Tom Brady's new slot receiver. I mean, of course, everyone's like, oh, the announcer. You hear the announcers? The announcers in that game were like, Brady really loves Scott Miller. No shit. That's the exact type of receiver he likes to hit over the middle. So Scott Miller had a little bit of a game there. Other guys I have on my list now. There's some. If you drafted Michael Thomas, I have him in a couple places too. The one guy that's supposed to be money in the bank, he failed you, and now he might be out for a little while. So, I mean, Emmanuel Sanders is obviously owned in your league, but if you want a dart throw and you're in a deep league, a 14-team league, we know a lot of people in these 14-team leagues, 16-team leagues. Quan Smith is, he's out there. Go get him. Willie Snead did some damage. I'm not interested. Even in the deepest of dynasty leagues, it just to see. I mean, we've all been wrong. You've been burned and wrong about Willie Snead in the past, but it just doesn't seem like a guy I'm interested. Keelan Cole had a good game for the Jags as well. All right, we're doing good, everybody. Let's move on to the tight end position. Tight end is one of the more interesting positions this week. Logan Thomas is the guy. Everybody likes him. I don't even know if I love Logan Thomas, but he got 8 targets and he's like the only game in town at that position there. So I think Logan Thomas is an interesting ad. You don't need to put more than a buck or two on him. If you're in a position where you just don't like your tight ends, which I don't know how you can be. All the tight ends, I mean, Dallas Goedert went crazy this week. TJ Hawkinson came through for you. Some of the tight ends disappointed if you drafted Gronk. We've been telling you not to draft Gronk, but if you drafted Gronk, he's getting the Antonio Gates treatment where he's like playing third downs only in red zone. OJ Howard, he's on the list as well. Here, I'm going to read you my list. So OJ Howard would be near the top. Logan Thomas would be near the top. And now that George Kittle's a little banged up, Jordan Reed is a live play. All these guys low single digits, $3, $4, $5. If you had Blake Jarwin, Dalton Schultz, it's going to be one of these things where you're not really going to want to start him. So you'll be able to get him for free after waivers run. Here's an ugly one for you. Greg Olsen, the old man. Now, listen, he was offered to go back to the commentating booth, and he said no. And he's playing with Russell Wilson, and he's been really good in the red zone. So for him to come back and play football, he must have been promised a role. He wasn't promised probably 30 snaps a game. He's probably going to be involved, and we know that he's had problems. Stay healthy, Greg Olsen. But while he's healthy, he's going to get some targets. So if you're the George Kittle owner and you're in a bad spot and there's just no tight ends on your league, I think Greg Olsen is certainly a live play. Again, I wouldn't bid more than a few dollars on any of these guys, but sometimes you just you got to do you have to pick up these scrubby tight ends. And Logan Thomas is certainly one of the most interesting. Now let's switch over to the quarterback league, and then we'll the quarterback position, and then we will wrap this up. So if you're in a super flex league, there really shouldn't be any starting quarterbacks on your waiver wire. So I'm going to give you one super flex option that you can get. So if you're in a super flex league, the sneaky pickup of the week is Case Keenum. Case Keenum's on the Browns. Baker Mayfield did not look good to me, or anyone. You watched football. You saw what he looked like. And if you remember, Kevin Stefanski, who took over coaching for the Browns, the one good year that Case Keenum had was when Kevin Stefanski was the coach of the Vikings. So if Baker Mayfield, if his obvious limitations, if he can't get back on the ball, if he can't distribute, if he keeps being as inaccurate as he has been, and the Browns go 0-3 or 1-4, there is a chance, and I think a decent chance, a 25% chance that they go to Case Keenum to try to get the engine started and get the offense going. So if you're in a super flex league, not a 1 QB league, in a 1 QB league, leave Case Keenum where he is. If you're in a super flex league, and especially if you own Baker Mayfield, go get Case Keenum just in case Baker Mayfield gets benched. You're going to have a starting quarterback on a presumably good offense. So, all right, let's just do the 1 QB leagues. Chances are you don't need a QB. I mean, if you say Baker was your starter, or you had one of these other QBs that just shit the bed for you, Gardner Minshew is the big pickup of the week. I always thought Minshew looked good, and he runs around, plays that hair on fire style, almost like you remember when you used to play two-hand touch football in the street with your friends, and the one guy would run around and then he'd make those long passes and throw it up there. I mean, he takes chances, he runs. Gardner Minshew for fantasy, I think, has a very high floor and a high ceiling. Teddy Two Gloves, Teddy Bridgewater, didn't look so bad to me. He looked competent. So again, these are $1, $2 bids. If you're desperate for a quarterback, you can go 6 or 7. And Kirk Cousins had a good game. He probably will be a free pickup. 1 QB leagues, it's never a problem to get any of these guys. So those are the 3 pickups. But again, the sneaky super flex pickup is Case Keenum, just in case Baker crashes and burns. Defenses. Now, just season-long defenses. I don't mean matchup based, but the Rams and the Washington football team, both of those teams looked dominant on defense. Did you watch the Cowboys game on Sunday night? The Rams front pressure, man, they just got to the quarterback. So if they're, it's possible in your league that they're floating out there, because in week 1, people were feared that Dallas was this mega offense. So they may have thrown the Rams back in. I'd go get them. They look like they're going to produce a lot of sacks and a lot of turnovers and maybe some pick sixes. So the Rams are a great one. And then also Washington, they were a big DFS. They came through for you in DFS this week. That front line, the Chase Young, they look like murderers, man, as far as like ability to get to the quarterback and just kill him and roll him over. And they're gonna cause some havoc there. And Washington looks like they're a frisky defense there. So I would certainly go get them for your season-long leagues. Kickers. Please tell me you're not playing in a league with kickers, but if you are, just play the waiver wire. And here's a good waiver wire tip for you. If you're in a bunch of leagues like we are, DFS Army, or even if you're in a couple leagues, just go to your week 1 and don't do projections. Obviously, do final stats and then sort by fantasy points. That's a quick, easy way, because all the guys that scored the most will pop up to the top. So if you're in Yahoo, if you're in Sleeper, if you're in ESPN, any software you play on, RT, go to the week 1 stats, sort by fantasy points scored, and then all of the players that scored the most in week 1 will come up, and you'll be able to make your bid amount. So that's a good suggestion on how to sort through these players. All right, everybody. That's it for today. This is the Waiver Wire Week 2 podcast, DFS Army. We're sponsored by No House Advantage. They are a props for cash app. Download them. If you love playing player props like I do, go in there. And what's really cool about No House Advantage is that you can order which prop is most important for you. So you're going to pick out your 5 props. And what you're going to do is you're going to order them, and your most important prop gets 5 points. And for those of you who aren't as familiar with props, what those are under overs. For example, if Travis Kelce is one of the props that you want to play in this prop game in No House Advantage, they'll set his reception total for, say, 6.5. And you say, hey, he's going to get over 6.5 or under 6.5. And you pick out 5 of those, and you can win money. So go over there. The game is self-explanatory. It's excellent. I love it. I've been playing it every week. No House Advantage. Use deposit code ARMY, and you can get a deposit match up to $20. All right. Follow me on Twitter at Alan Seslowsky, ALANSESLOWSKY. I answer a lot of start-sit questions, and I will help you with your season-long league. And then come see me over in the Slack chat. in the DFS Army Slack chat. Sign up to DFS Army, become a member, use code SEZ, SEZ, and we will give you 20% off. All right, everybody. I'll be back next week with another edition of the Waiver Wire podcast. Until then, bye-bye.